Ask anyone what the biggest threat to humanity is, and they'll likely say nuclear war or an asteroid impact. Fortunately, the chances of either happening are extremely small. However, there's a third threat to humanity that is not just more likely, but has already happened multiple times: pandemics. The most recent example is COVID-19, a virus that swept across the globe. Fortunately for us, COVID-19 wasn't particularly deadly for most people who weren't elderly or already ill. The same can't be said for the Black Plague. It was a pandemic that left behind a legacy far darker than its name suggests. What began as a small outbreak in China grew to infect a large portion of Asia, nearly all of Europe, and even North Africa. This wasn't just a disease, it was a reckoning. Towns were abandoned, bodies piled up in the streets, and 50 million lives were erased from history. But this didn't happen overnight. The plague was as slow as it was deadly. To understand how it unfolded, we need to go back to where it all began. Europe, 1347. Life was hard but steady. The majority of people lived in small villages, working as farmers, craftsmen, or laborers under the watchful eye of feudal lords. Trade routes thrived, connecting Europe to Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa, while bustling cities like Florence, Paris, and Venice became centers of art, commerce, and innovation. Yet beneath this progress lay a fragile foundation. Cities were overcrowded, sanitation was nearly non-existent, and rats scurried through every corner of society, unknowingly carrying a menace no one could foresee. At the start of the 14th century, Europe was experiencing what historians now call the medieval warm period. Crops flourished, trade networks expanded, and the population swelled to an estimated 75 million. Cities grew rapidly, becoming hubs of wealth, culture, and opportunity. But there was a darker side to this prosperity. Overcrowded urban areas bred disease. Streets were filled with human and animal waste. People rarely bathed, and fleas and lice were constant companions. In rural areas, malnutrition was common because of successive famines earlier in the century, leaving people weak and vulnerable to illness. The danger was further amplified by Europe's interconnectedness through trade. The continent's growing reliance on goods from Asia meant that merchants, sailors, and caravans were constantly moving between regions. Ports like Constantinople and Genoa bustled with activity, their harbors filled with ships carrying spices, silk, and unknowingly, the plague. Chapter 1: How it all began. While the spread of the Black Death in Europe might suggest it began there, it did not. Its origins can be traced back to Central Asia, where the bacterium Yersinia pestis thrived in the guts of fleas that infested rats. Historians believe the outbreak likely began in the Mongol Empire in the 1330s, spreading along the Silk Road, one of the busiest trade routes in the world. By the 1340s, the disease had reached the Crimean Peninsula, where it would meet its first European victims. According to one chilling story, Mongol forces besieging the Genoese trading post of Kaffa catapulted the corpses of plague victims over the city walls, hoping to infect the defenders. Whether or not this story is true, the outcome was the same. Genoese merchants fled Kaffa, unknowingly carrying the plague with them on their ships. When these ships docked in Sicily in October 1347, the Black Death had officially arrived in Europe. In 1347, the first European towns to experience the Black Death were utterly unprepared. Entire families fell sick overnight. Priests, doctors, and grave diggers were overwhelmed. In some places, the dead were left unburied for weeks, their bodies rotting in the streets. In Messina, Sicily, the disease killed so many so quickly that survivors fled into the countryside, unknowingly spreading the plague further. From Sicily, the Black Death traveled north, hitching rides on trade ships and caravans. By early 1348, it had reached mainland Italy, then spread to France, Spain, and England. No town, no village, and no person were safe. In the spring of 1348, the city of Florence became one of the first major urban centers to face the full wrath of the Black Death. The Italian poet Giovanni Boccaccio, who lived through the pandemic, wrote in his Decameron, "The plight of the lower and most of the middle class was pitiable to behold. They sickened by the thousands daily and died unattended and without help. Many ended their lives in the public streets, others shut themselves up in their houses and there died." Now, let's pause for a moment and think about what this really means. Imagine walking through the streets of your city today and seeing bodies, people you may have known, collapsed in alleyways or lying lifeless on doorsteps. There is no ambulance, no hospital beds, and no one willing to help because even touching the sick could mean signing your own death sentence. Boccaccio's words reveal more than just numbers or statistics. They show us the sheer scale of suffering. Families were torn apart, entire neighborhoods wiped out, and fear consumed everyone. In Florence alone, it is estimated that nearly 60% of the population perished within months. Chapter 2. What made the plague so deadly, and how did it spread? The Black Death wasn't just another illness. It was pure biological destruction. To understand why this disease claimed so many lives, we need to unravel the sinister ways it spread and the horrifying ways it ravaged the human body. The plague bacterium, Yersinia pestis, was a microscopic killer transmitted primarily through fleas that lived on rats. These fleas carried the bacterium in their guts, and when they bit a human, they regurgitated the infection into the wound. From there, the bacteria spread like wildfire. Within a day or two of infection, the first symptoms would appear. Victims experienced fever, chills, and excruciating headaches. Then came the buboes, large, swollen lymph nodes that appeared near the groin, armpits, or neck. These grotesque lumps, sometimes as large as an apple, were blackened and filled with pus. The pain was unimaginable, and the swelling was often accompanied by vomiting, delirium, and a deep sense of doom. If the plague bacteria entered the bloodstream, it caused septicemic plague, a far more terrifying condition. Victims developed blackened fingers, toes, and noses as the infection caused the blood in the blood vessels to coagulate. Hemorrhages turned their skin dark purple or black, earning the disease its infamous name. Death often came within hours. Worse still was pneumonic plague, which infected the lungs. This form spread not by fleas, but through the air, making it even deadlier. Victims coughed up blood, struggling to breathe, their lungs filling with fluid. Without treatment, a concept far beyond the capabilities of medieval medicine, mortality rates approached 100%. But the devastation didn't end there. The speed and scope of the plague's spread were unparalleled, thanks to the interconnected trade routes that crisscrossed Europe. Ships carried infected rats to bustling ports, while caravans brought the disease to remote villages. The close quarters of medieval towns and cities where people lived packed together without sanitation were the perfect environment for the plague to thrive. The Black Death did not just take lives, it erased entire communities from existence. In England, chronicler Henry Knighton described how cities like Bristol and Leicester became ghostly reminders of the living world. Thousands perished in each town and city, their bodies piling up faster than they could be buried. Sheep and cattle wandered untended through the fields, crops rotted where they grew, and entire villages were abandoned, some never to be repopulated. In desperation, the Church took extraordinary measures, granting priests the authority to absolve sins in masses, as death claimed the faithful in droves. But the plague did not just kill, it shattered society. Laborers, scarce and emboldened, demanded higher wages to fill the empty fields, igniting tensions with the aristocracy. With every death, the old feudal order began to crumble, and the eerie silence of deserted streets spoke of a world irreversibly changed. England was not just burying its dead, it was burying an era, with the plague as its relentless undertaker. Another haunting tale comes from England, where a monk named Brother Thomas chronicled the collapse of his monastery in 1348. In his writings, he described how one by one, his fellow monks fell ill. At first they prayed over the sick, hoping for divine intervention. But soon, fear overtook faith. As the bodies piled up, Brother Thomas recounted digging graves alone, his prayers muffled by the stench of decay. By the end, he was the only one left. The Black Death spared no one. It tore through noble estates and peasant cottages alike. In Avignon, France, the Pope himself was so terrified that he surrounded himself with fires, believing the heat would purify the air and protect him. While he survived, many of his clerics did not, leaving the church in chaos. Yet, despite the widespread fear and death, some still sought to understand how the disease spread. Many believed it was a punishment from God, brought about by sin. Others blamed bad air, known as miasma, and some turned to scapegoating. In towns across Europe, Jewish communities were falsely accused of poisoning wells, leading to horrific massacres that compounded the tragedy. The combination of a highly infectious disease, an unprepared population, and medieval superstitions created a perfect storm of suffering. As the plague spread, the suffering became not just physical, but psychological. With no understanding of how the disease worked, people turned to all sorts of remedies, some born of desperation, others from long-standing superstition. As death claimed countless lives, the medical community found itself helpless in the face of this invisible enemy. Chapter 3. The Medicine of Desperation. When death came knocking, medieval Europe had no answers. The most experienced physicians stood as powerless as the simplest peasant, facing a terror that defied everything they understood about healing. The roots of medieval medicine stretched back to the ancient worlds of Greece and Rome. Doctors relied on the wisdom of Hippocrates, Aristotle, and Galen, medical giants whose theories would prove utterly inadequate against the plague. Their understanding of the human body was a delicate balance of 4 bodily fluids, or humors, each connected to an element, a season, and a temperament. Blood represented air, yellow bile represented fire, phlegm represented water, and black bile represented earth. This intricate system, once considered the pinnacle of medical knowledge, now crumbled in the face of an unstoppable disease. The story of the 4 bodily fluids is actually a video I would like to create in the future, so make sure to click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell if you would like to learn more. The physicians of the day wore their helplessness like a second skin. Their medical texts, largely available only through obscure Arabic translations of Latin and Greek works, offered no comfort. The brilliant medical encyclopedia of Ibn Sina, known as Avicenna, became a maze of confusion, its wisdom lost in translation. But humans will always fight against death, no matter how futile the battle might seem. The cures they devised were a desperate cocktail of medical theory, religious belief, folklore, and pure superstition. Some believed animal-based remedies might work. Others concocted elaborate potions and fumigations. Bloodletting, cutting patients to balance their humors, and often involving leeches, became a common treatment, though it did nothing but weaken those already struggling to survive. Supernatural explanations flourished where medical knowledge failed. Astrological alignments, divine punishment, demonic interference all became potential explanations for the plague. The wealthy had one advantage: they could flee. Country estates became refuge, though in reality, these flights only helped spread the disease further. Those with money bought their way out of quarantine, carrying the plague from city to countryside, from one community to another. For those who could not escape, survival became a daily negotiation with death. They tried everything: herbal pastes, protective amulets, prayers, anything that might offer even a glimmer of hope. Only one approach would prove somewhat effective: quarantine and social distancing. Sound familiar? Yet even this was met with resistance. People continued to gather for religious services. They went about their daily business. The human need for connection proved stronger than the fear of death. Some of the most bizarre treatments revealed both the depths of human desperation and the extraordinary lengths people would go to survive. The Vicary method stood as a testament to medieval medical imagination. English doctor Thomas Vicary proposed a cure that involved a live chicken, its bare back and rear plucked clean, then strapped directly onto a plague victim's swollen lymph nodes. The theory was simple: the chicken would draw the disease from the human body, absorbing the infection. Doctors would strap the bird in place, watching intently as it became sick, believing it was sacrificing itself to save the patient. The process continued until either the chicken or the patient died. Animal-based cures reflected a superstitious understanding of disease. Snakes, long associated with evil in European mythology, were chopped into pieces and rubbed directly onto plague buboes. The logic was primitive yet profound. Evil would be drawn to evil, and the snake would somehow extract the disease. Pigeons were used in similar ways, though no one could explain why this particular bird was thought to have curative powers. The wealthy had their own extraordinary remedies. Unicorn horn powder became the ultimate luxury cure, an astronomical expense that promised protection. Physicians claimed the powder could only be obtained by luring a unicorn with a virgin maiden, a myth that added mystical credibility to the treatment. Emeralds, ground to a fine powder and mixed into food or water, became another expensive option for those who could afford to literally consume precious stones in hopes of survival. For those who could not purchase emeralds, even more dangerous alternatives emerged. Some consumed arsenic or mercury, substances that would kill them faster than the plague itself. The desperation was palpable. Death by poison seemed preferable to the slow, agonizing death promised by the plague. Four Thieves' vinegar became a legendary potion, supposedly created by four criminals who used it to rob homes and graves without contracting the disease. A mixture of vinegar, wine, and powerful spices, like sage, rosemary, and wormwood, it represented a rare glimmer of hope in a time of complete hopelessness. Wealthy patients consumed theriac, a mysterious paste mixed with syrup, its exact ingredients a closely guarded secret. Fumigation emerged as another popular strategy. People believed bad air spread the disease, so they burned thatch, carried flower bouquets, and filled their pockets with sweet-smelling substances. This practice even inspired the children's nursery rhyme Ring Around the Rosie, a haunting reminder of a time when people believed flowers could protect them from death. Medieval medical treatments revealed a horrifying blend of desperation and misguided science. Doctors believed they could literally sweat out the plague. Patients were instructed to sit near blazing fires, the intense heat supposed to draw out disease through profuse sweating. Some went to even more extreme lengths, positioning themselves near open sewers. The logic was simple. Bad air would somehow be attracted to the equally foul air of human waste, leaving the patient's body clean. From there, treatments only got worse. Doctors created medicinal pastes from a stomach-turning mixture of roots, herbs, and flowers. And sometimes, human waste. They would apply these directly to lanced buboes, inadvertently introducing more infection. Clean urine was considered a miracle medicine. People would drink it and bathe in it, believing it held miraculous healing properties. Urine collectors became a respected profession, with doctors paying high prices for what they considered a pure medical product. The desperate treatments only highlighted one brutal truth: medieval medicine was utterly powerless against the plague. As fear consumed entire communities, a new figure would emerge, a medical practitioner who would become the enduring symbol of this terrifying era. Wrapped in leather, face hidden behind a bizarre bird-like mask, the plague doctor stood as humanity's last desperate line of defense against an invisible enemy. Chapter 4. The Plague Doctor. With treatments failing and death claiming entire families, people looked to masked figures with a mixture of hope and terror. They were part doctor, part spectral harbinger, walking through infected streets like dark omens, their very appearance a reminder of the catastrophe consuming Europe. The plague doctor would become more than a medical professional. They would become a legend. Imagine walking through a plague-stricken street and seeing a figure that looks more like a nightmare than a doctor. Leather-clad, with a long bird-like beak protruding from a mask, the plague doctor became not only a symbol of death, but desperate hope. Contrary to popular belief, the famous plague doctor costume did not exist during the beginning of the Black Death. In fact, it would emerge nearly 3 centuries after the initial plague outbreak, a testament to how medical understanding would slowly evolve. The first detailed description of this protective outfit comes from Charles Delorme, a royal physician to King Louis XIII of France. In 1619, during a plague outbreak in Paris, Delorme developed an outfit made entirely of Moroccan goat leather. boots, breeches, a long coat, hat, and gloves, each piece carefully designed to create a barrier between the doctor and disease. The most striking feature was the mask. A long beak, about half a foot long, protruded from the doctor's face, stuffed with perfumed herbs and aromatic spices. Doctors believed these herbs would purify the pestilential miasma they thought caused the disease. Crystal eyepieces completed the ensemble, creating a figure that looked more like a bird of prey than a medical professional. But during the actual Black Death, medical care was far more varied. Physicians, surgeons, barbers, apothecaries, midwives, herbalists, and bees and priests all played roles in fighting the plague. They were not united by a single uniform, but by a common, desperate mission to save lives. Some of these early plague doctors were remarkable in their dedication. Take Professor Gentile da Foligno from Bologna, Italy. He wrote extensive casebooks about the plague, documenting its spread and symptoms. His reward for this brave documentation was death. In 1348, he succumbed to the very disease he was studying. Spanish physician Jacques d'Agremont was among the first to publish a plague treatise in April 1348. These small books were lifelines of medical knowledge, advising peers and the literate public on prevention and treatment. They represented humanity's first organized attempt to understand an incomprehensible enemy. These doctors worked in a world without germ theory, without antibiotics, without any real understanding of how disease spread. Yet they deserve more credit than history often gives them. They recognized plague symptoms. They documented its spread. Most importantly, they gave people hope during an age of constant medical crisis. The plague doctor became more than a medical professional. They became a symbol of human resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering. Wrapped in leather, masked against an invisible enemy, they walked into death's domain time and again, armed with nothing but courage and a desperate desire to heal. As the plague continued to ravage Europe, these doctors would become the thin line between total despair and human survival. The doctors who confronted the Black Death were not ignorant. They were scholars, deeply committed to understanding the terrifying disease that consumed their world. Their theories, though ultimately incorrect, represented the most advanced medical knowledge of their time. As mentioned previously, medieval medical understanding centered on the theory of 4 bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These were more than just medical concepts. They were a comprehensive explanation of human health and disease. When the plague struck, doctors immediately tried to interpret its horrors through this established framework. Plague buboes, those grotesque, swollen lymph nodes, became critical evidence in their medical investigations. Doctors noted these painful lumps typically formed in the groin, armpits, and neck. They believed these locations were significant, seeing the buboes as the body's attempt to expel corrupted humors from major organs like the liver, heart, and brain. Prevention, they believed, meant maintaining humor balance. Doctors prescribed elaborate medical regimens involving careful diets, drugs that induced vomiting and urination, and bleeding. Their goal was to expel what they considered corrupted humors and prevent black bile, associated with melancholia, from dominating the body. The University of Paris faculty offered perhaps the most elaborate explanation. In 1348, when the king requested advice about the approaching plague, they combined medical theory with astrology, a respected science at the time. They argued that a planetary conjunction of Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter in the zodiac sign of Aquarius had overheated and corrupted Earth's air. This poisoned atmosphere, they claimed, was traveling from Asia to Europe, bringing plague in its wake. The concept of pestilential air became central to their understanding. Doctors recommended carrying sweet-smelling substances, violets, wormwood, vinegar, or for the wealthy, chunks of rare ambergris. They burned pitch, incense, and bitter-smelling woods, believing these could purify the contaminated atmosphere. Some even suggested firing cannons, hoping gunpowder smoke might combat the deadly miasma. These remedies reflected the limited knowledge of the time. Yet these practices also revealed something deeper: humanity's refusal to surrender to despair. Though the doctors' methods often missed the mark, their presence symbolized a collective effort to fight back against the darkness. With every step into infected streets, they carried the hope that even in the face of death, there was still something to be done. Their bird-like masks, their leather protective gear, their careful documentation, these were not signs of primitive thinking, but of human determination. In the face of total catastrophe, they did the only thing possible, they observed. They theorized. They fought back with the only weapons they had, their intelligence and their hope. The story of these doctors, flawed yet fearless, reminds us that the struggle against the plague was not only about survival. It was about learning, documenting, and holding on to the belief that understanding the unknown might one day save lives. And in doing so, they laid the first stones on the path toward the modern world. A legacy born out of unimaginable suffering. The Black Death was more than a disease. It was a moment when civilization itself hung in the balance. Half of Europe died. Entire families were erased. Cities became graveyards. The social order that had existed for centuries crumbled overnight. But from this apocalypse, something extraordinary emerged. The seeds of the modern world. The plague broke the back of feudalism. With populations decimated, surviving workers could demand better wages. The rigid social structures that had controlled people's lives for generations suddenly became flexible. Trade transformed. Medical understanding evolved. The old world died along with its victims. Humanity not only survived the Black Death, it was fundamentally remade by it. Fortunately, we have since developed the knowledge and technology to combat bacteria in all its shapes and forms, but not without sacrifice. To learn more, you will want to click on the video I am opening now, which tells the tale of a man who voluntarily consumed bacteria for the advancement of science and medicine. See you there.